That was for a video game. That was for Dark Souls 2, where I played a half-man, half-scorpion, which surprisingly just sounded a little bit like me. I was like bigging myself to do like, what would it, going back to the animal study stuff that we've kind of like touched on. It's like, oh, what does this man scorpion sound like? And it's like, no, Chris, just do your normal voice. That'd be great.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Small Pocket Podcast, the podcast all about video production and ways to improve your online videos. I'm your host, Will Corcoran. In this episode, I spoke to a voice actor who is famous on TikTok for his impressions, the very talented Christopher Tester. Chris has one of those voices that is impossible to ignore. The very first time I heard Chris's voice, I knew I had to work with him. During the episode, we discuss how to work with a voice actor, what the future of AI-generated voices might look like, how Chris uses TikTok to promote his business, and Chris talks me through voicing characters in video games like Dark Souls 2 and Total Warhammer. If you're a content creator or marketing manager, and if you've ever wondered how to instantly increase the quality of your video production using a voice actor, or if you're generally curious about the work that goes into voice acting behind the scenes, then this podcast is for you. So let's get into it. Thanks for being on it. Thanks for doing the podcast.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, that's very kind of you. Thank you for having me. It's it's Friday, so there's lots of last minute stuff for people realizing that they didn't actually the stuff that they thought they'd signed up on has completely changed and they need me to change it at the last minute, just the usual kind of stuff. So that was all of this morning, and it's also kind of tricky because I'm going away to the US next week for a voiceover conference, so yeah.
You have those?
Yeah, apparently they do. So this thing is called Voiceover Atlanta. So it's in Atlanta. That's nice and self-explanatory. So I'm doing it. It's expenses paid, thankfully, because it's part of a competition. So yeah, it should be fun.
So, like, you won the competition or something? Or like,
yeah, so there are 5 finalists. Yes, 5 finalists. There was a kind of like an online competition through various different rounds, various different genres. So it's been whittled from about 2,000 people down to 5 of us. And kind of as the opening event to the conference, or the opening evening event, is a kind of like a showdown between us all. So we're given like a commercial script, a narration script, a video game, and an animation script, plus one completely sight unseen script. Do it all together. There's a panel of industry judges to judge us, and then off of the back of that, I could win some very exciting prizes, or more likely, not win anything at all. But it's in terms of getting in front of the right people. Certainly in terms of the US market, it's quite nice as an excuse to do that. Plus, there are quite a few collaborators and coaches and other voiceover talents that I've met digitally over the last few years, but never actually met in person. So to be able to have the excuse to go over there and say hello, and do a bit of networking and all of that kind of thing, should be fun.
It sounds really fun. What's who are you coming up against? Who are your competitors?
So it's incredibly varied. There's some people. There's one guy who's really heightened into doing a lot of animation work. So he's done stuff for a whole variety of kind of like anime dubbing and all of that kind of thing. Then you've got another guy who specializes more in kind of like audiobooks, I believe. There's another guy who is more into kind of like character work. There's another person who deals with kind of like American promo. She's the voice of various different TV stations over in the US. So it's a real mixed bag. I'm kind of like the token Brit. So there we go.
That's really cool. I've listened to a lot of your TikTok, and especially your LinkedIn examples of, especially your video game characters.
Oh yes, yes.
I'm a Warhammer fan.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. I've played a bit of the new Dark Tide and like the Total War series type thing. So
fantastic.
What's it called again? Sorry, Total Warhammer.
Yeah, Total Warhammer, because Total War franchise has all of these offshoots, of which the Warhammer universe is one of many. So I was involved in Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 3. And now I'm working with the guy who kind of like hired me for that is now working at a different software developer, and so I'm now working on that project, which I'm completely NDA'd, so I can't talk about. But it is fascinating because essentially this is a game that's it's potentially, well, it's going to be a huge title, and normally what they do is they get AI voices in there as kind of placeholder. As placeholder whilst they're building the game before they actually require any acting, just to see if the dynamics are right and all of that kind of stuff. But from working with me and working with another couple of voiceover talents, he was very active in wanting to say, no, we need to get actors involved because they'll actually bring, hopefully, something a bit better, which means that when we actually hire the quote-unquote proper or final voices, then we'll know exactly more what we're working with because, AI, it can give you a certain element of range, but hopefully not as much as a human being would. So I think between two people, me being one, we're voicing all of the characters in the game.
So wow, an insane amount of voice.
Yeah, so it's an insane amount of voice. It's almost like a more expressive e-learning exercise in many kind of ways. But it's fascinating because you get to see this is the first build of this game, and you're like, holy shit! Like no one's going to see this for about another 3 or 4 years, and it's really cool. Because you can see things from the devs' point of view, what they need, what's useful, and for my own nefarious purposes, I get in there, which means that if there's one of the voices that they actually like that I've done, that might end up in the final game without me having to audition. I mean, if not, that so be it, and I still get paid for my time. But obviously, it would be cool, like in terms of a prestige title to be involved in and all of that kind of thing. Obviously, it would be cool to be involved in that. Yeah.
I thought your voice was like easily good enough to be doing it. Like I think was it the example of like the Nurgle, like the ogre?
Yeah. I mean, with this particular title, it's a lot more naturalistic kind of like stuff. So no voice filters are required. But the Nurgle stuff, and I did Lockyer Fellheart, who was more of a kind of like a vampire demon, who, again, there's quite a lot of processing involved, but you need to be able to deliver the performance before the processing. That was more kind of transformational stuff, which I suppose lent into my drama school training and pretending to be a bat in the middle of London Zoo during my 3-year conservatoire training. So there we go.
That's what they had to do. You had to pretend to be a bat.
Various different things. So at Central School of Speech and Drama, which is where I trained, there's a thing called Animal Studies, which is a thing that goes for the entirety of your second year. You're given a group animal and you're given an individual animal. And in the first term, you get to choose. So all of the guys go, I'm going to be a tiger, obviously. And then they go, yeah, that's great. You're a bat. So now you need to study a bat and you need to take on its kind of inner life and kind of quirks. With the whole idea being is that you move from that and then you gradually anthropomorphize it, if that makes sense. So that you can, it's just about getting away from your physical choices and therefore also your vocal choices and your kind of your internal rhythm. A lot of acting is about stripping things away and just being your authentic self or all of that kind of thing. But making sure that's as a tool to make sure that you can go the other way, that you can basically work from outside in so that not every single character that you do comes down to what you're normally like all of the time. So it's those two extremes. On the one hand, a lot of the voiceover work that I do is about just being authentic, about being personable, about talking to people and, being emotionally connected, whatever it is that you're trying to sell them or get them to do or whatever. And then there's the kind of hyper-characterization stage as well, where a crazy tool like that can actually be really, really useful and conducive in getting somewhere very quickly because they don't have the time for you to find it in a room on a video game. It's not like, we'll do 4 or 5 hours of rehearsal. They kind of want you to be in there and just be able to bang it out because you've got thousands of lines to do in a 3-hour session and time is money.
Yep. Yeah. Could you show us your bat? Or could I hear your bad voice?
No, because I haven't worked on it, I'm afraid, for a long period of time. So I think it would be a bastardization at the very best. But it was all to do with about that kind of like heightened rhythm all the way through. Was a huge kind of thing because their heartbeat is so absolutely fast, and then those moments of complete stillness whilst they're taking in their surroundings and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, but obviously that then invites for, if you want to do more kind of transformative stuff, then that's a gateway to it.
I see. I guess it's like kind of they're teaching you a tool to use that you can replicate with anything you want in the future, essentially. So putting yourself inside the space of like an animal and then trying to think about how it might sound and speak. And
yeah, I mean, the whole reason why Central is called the Central School of Speech and Drama is that there's no one methodology. So it's all about giving you loads of different tools, and some may work for some people, some may not work for other people. It depends on the project. So it's not like animal studies is a go-to thing for me, but when it comes to voicing monsters and things that, I don't inhabit naturally, yes, a lot can obviously be done in post, but like, if your mouth is decomposing and you're supposed to be like 400 feet tall, and your mouth is in your stomach and it's not in your head as Nurgle is, then you got to be able to find different ways to get into that rather than just giving it a go.
I just can't even imagine how I would start. Like, it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Exactly. Yeah. No. It is kind of crazy, and it can be kind of like overwhelming, and that's why, I mean, like, nobody needs to have trained to be an actor, but it's just useful as a tool. And I might not use something like that for years, but then when the job requires it, then it's good to be able to go like, oh, okay, so I need to be thinking about the physicality first. And I mean, the one rule through all of that is that regardless of what voiceover work, regardless of whatever acting stuff that I'm doing, is that, the physicality will inform the delivery. So that's always got to be the kind of like the golden rule, is that you've got to make some form of physical choice, even if it is just like they need it to be relaxing and laid back. Therefore, I'll probably be sat down and quite laid back whilst I'm recording, because that will subtly affect my vocal delivery without me having to try to act relaxed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, I think there's a little bit of that in trying to use like sort of self-talk. Like, when you're trying to visualize your future, or trying to encourage yourself. I've heard that things like smiling a lot can make you happier, or standing in like a Superman pose can make you more confident, or certain poses can make you like sort of act differently and sort of think differently. But I guess the same thing applies to acting as well.
Yeah, I mean, we taught there's a technique. I mean, it's all very psychological gesture is one thing that it's kind of like called by a practitioner called Michael Chekhov. So that was all specifically about that, in terms of it doesn't need to be a literal physicality that character might use, but it's kind of like a way in. And like one of the things that I try and do even with the TikToks in terms of like practice and stuff like that, is that I don't spend ages trying to get myself into an emotional state, because I don't have the time to do that, and that's not how I work. Because through my own practice, I know that if I try and think my way into it, I get strangely trapped in my head. And you're kind of thinking, oh, am I being happy enough? Am I being sad enough? Am I feeling the emotions that I should feel? So you get in this kind of feedback loop, which is incredibly unhelpful to you as a performer, because you're supposed to be unself-conscious about what you're doing so that you can focus on the person that you're talking to. So there are various different techniques to that. Michael Chekhov, psychological gesture is one. There's a American practitioner called Nikki Flax as well, who is all about kind of like your emotions are trapped in various different parts of your body, and by just releasing it, you kind of like take that first layer of skin off, and you're a bit more vulnerable. And that's a 3 or 4 minute exercise that you do. And that's literally just like, I place my hand here, I place my hand here, I touch various parts of my face. It looks absolutely mad and insane, but it immediately puts me in a more visceral, I suppose, position. So it's not like every job is going to require that, but in terms of wanting to be able to introduce as as much breadth to my performance as possible, it's a good thing to just be able to continue to practice. So recording the TikToks is just an excuse for me to, yes, I'm doing my social media kind of stuff, but it's also like I'm practicing the kind of actory stuff that I should be kind of practicing. Yeah.
I had you down as like voice over artist, but all over your LinkedIn, you've got yourself down as voice actor. I guess that's a thing that like people mislabel voice actors as voice over artists. Could you tell us about a voice actor and what that means?
Okay, so a voice actor as opposed to a voice artist. I mean, I think it's a reflection of how the job continues to change. A voiceover artist, I mean, it does suggest there's a certain artisanal, kind of flavor to it all, and that you're just tailoring and just putting the little bits of detail and crafting things in this beautiful thing and then looking back at it. Whereas I think of a voice actor as being very much more in the kind of the blood and guts, essentially, of it, even if it is the blood and guts of e-learning module about ball bearings. It's which, in terms of like some of my least favorite work, that was certainly up there. But for me, it's the acting has to come first. I mean, if someone calls me a voiceover artist, I have no problem about that at all, because there's a lot of the stuff that I think is probably more in that mode, where it's about how you sound and how it all weaves in together, and you've got to have that appreciation of that there are lots of other externals, like the music people are using, or the editing or the visuals that's going on. I think that's where the artist comes in, is when you kind of go, how do you fit yourself into the whole? The other kind of external whole, like you would in any, like even in a theatre show, like how naturalistic is it? What's the lighting like? What's the style? Is it super realistic, or is it hyper stylized in some kind of way? So I think the artistic side, I think, is about fitting in with the greater product or the greater creation, whereas the voice actor is about focusing on the practicalities of and people will go on about the craft. But that for me is bringing all that I can offer emotionally, intellectually, whatever, through my instrument, if we're going to go there. And that's mainly just through the instrument of my voice. So there's that tension, and I think increasingly, as in order to justify why people don't use like AI, for example, but actually using an actor, the best way you can justify that is through your acting skills. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, people are going to be more and more likely to get, like, if they just want a sound, they'll probably be able to get a computer that can do that sound.
Voiceover actor, to me, sounds a lot more proper, like the proper way of saying it. I think voiceover artist it's like a little bit kind of abstract. And I think like voice actor just seems like the much more sort of naturalistic term, because that's actually what you're doing. And it seems to sort of fit a lot better. I prefer it personally.
I think that it also has potentially quite egalitarian connotations as well. Oh no, I'm a voiceover artist, and I'm kind of on my high horse, kind of deigning to share my performance with you in some kind of way, as opposed to going, I want to be connecting with you as an equal, hopefully in some respect. But that's just me.
Yeah, I prefer it personally. I prefer it. So I've watched a lot of your work on LinkedIn and TikTok, and I was actually just blown away by some of the pieces. And like I think I booked you recently for a job.
You did. Thank you. Thank you.
No worries. The check's in the mail. I promise it's coming. Yeah, but like I think you're one of the only sort of like voice actors that I've seen on LinkedIn that like puts a lot of his work online and puts a lot of his work out there. And like certainly when I heard some of the pieces that you did, I said this is the exact voice that we need for the project. Sort of how did you get into that? And like what are your first memories of sort of like doing this kind of thing, or like how did you sort of get into it as a kid?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose starting from the beginning. So in 1981, two people loved each other very much. So I was never one of these people who wanted to be a voiceover right from the get-go in the beginning. I wasn't listening to kind of animations going, oh God, I really want to be able to voice these kind of characters or anything else like that. My first love is theatre. And hopefully that communicates in everything that I put out there as well. And, it was at the age of 13 that I, typical kind of actor story of like, I saw this production at the Royal Shakespeare Company and I was like, oh God, yes, all right. I know specifically what it was. It's a production called Coriolanus. And it was just a transformative experience. I saw that show like 5 times as a result. And then, but I didn't understand how you became an actor, really. I knew it was something that I may like to do, but I was also, I wasn't a particular extrovert, as a lot of actors actually aren't. So I then went to Warwick University to study English and theatre studies, to kind of have my cake and eat it, because I was relatively academic but interested in the art side of things as well, and was bitten by the kind of the drama bug there, and did shows at like Warwick Arts Centre and at the various different kind of like drama societies there, and then discovered what drama school was, and that was a way in. So I then went into doing another 3 years of training rather than, facing up to real life responsibilities and getting a job. I went, no, I'll do another 3 years. Went back to Somerset to work in a bookshop for a year, and then got into a couple of drama schools, and Central was the one that I went to, and survived to tell the tale. Going into the point in terms of the work that I share online, the problem I think a lot of voiceover actors can have is that obviously a lot of stuff is under NDA, like your coolest stuff quite often is. So you're not in control of when you can share it. But also I was just aware of the fact that that's not necessarily the most interesting thing. Like I saw, you see these people on LinkedIn and on social media all of the time. It's like, yeah, portfolio share is great. Don't get me wrong, because you need to show people what it is that you do. But it's such a small part of what we do. And you need to be very clear about what it is that you're offering and you're bringing. And so I thought, rather than, obviously you can do behind the scenes stuff and case studies and that kind of thing, but then I've got to ask my clients, is it okay? And they might be like, I'm usually not dealing with the end client. So I'm dealing with somebody who's stuck in the middle going, I just want to get this right. And now I've got a voice actor going like, oh, would it be okay, by the way, if I started posting this on TikTok? And you're like, this is not what I'm hiring you for. And so rather than wanting to put my end clients in that position, yes, you'll have the odd portfolio share. Let me know when it's published so that I can, share it and say how wonderful it's been to work with you and work with this brand or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I was thinking about like, are there other ways that I can demonstrate what it is that I am actually doing, but with stuff which isn't under NDA, and which helps to kind of share my passion. And I went through a whole different kind of experimentation on different social platforms of what would be the best way of doing that. But then I kind of went into, well, what's useful for me, what feeds me as an actor is kind of working with the best writing. Great, fantastic. So with as an actor, with a lot of roles that I'm now too old to play, I was like, okay, so I've got a laundry list of roles that I can just rattle off already. That's one thing. And then what that's actually encouraged me to do is to search out more material. And then, as it is now on TikTok, I kind of ask my audience for suggestions. And they share stuff with me that I might never have been aware of. Like, I was a huge fan of Warhammer, but I'd never read the books. And then people started suggesting a couple of Warhammer things to me. And I actually realized, like, some of this writing is amazing. Like, really damn good, and like the world that's been created behind it, and people are really invested in the characters, and lots of kind of anti-heroes, lots of complexity and ambiguity and all of that kind of thing. Or things like Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator speech, all the way through to films that I've never seen before. There was that extract from that TV program that you cited as well when you contacted me about doing a project. About what happens when we die. So for me, I was just like, this is an amazing piece of writing that I would love to have a go at, and that more people should be aware of and share. And so through the process of recording that, I feel as if I'm ticking a lot of different boxes. In that, hopefully, there's the performance side of things, and people see me. They also see my face. They also hear my voice. But they also, like, in a kind of marketing 101, they see that I'm in my studio. So things like, so do you have your own studio? Becomes an academic question, because I'm in my studio and I'm doing my thing, and I do it in one take and blah 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 blah. So that for me found like a thing that it ticked like my own kind of, I want to work on my craft, and quite often we're so kind of caught up in trying to do the marketing that we forget about the craft. Or we work on our craft only when we're actually doing the work, and that can sometimes be a bit dangerous. So I felt that it was doing that thing, but it was also actually a nice way of being able to get myself out there in a different way. Essentially because I didn't see a whole variety of other voice actors do it. So you identify a gap in the market and you go hard on it.
Yeah, I think it's very, very effective, and I think I didn't realize that like, having your own studio was sort of like a prerequisite that some like voiceover actors needed to sort of get a job. But like when you mention it, it makes perfect sense that you would need like a place to record, and having your own studio makes a hell of a lot of sense as well. Was it a lot of work sort of putting that studio together, or did you have to soundproof it, or?
Yeah, so my studio now as it is kind of being custom built for me, because I went through various different kind of homespun variations, shall we say, and that started from like literally using the duvet from my bed, like over the head, on the dressing room table next to the bedside, and just knowing that if I move too much, it would be picked up on the microphone. But hey, what are you going to do? I then kind of graduated to a hallway, which I was able to kind of soundproof and acoustically treat and learn all about those kind of things. So the various different iterations, and now basically I've got a spare room in my house, which has been almost completely soundproofed. There's a company called Moloko who specialize in kind of home studio builds. So I was like, I could do the whole DIY route, but that's going to take about 2 months. And I might screw a lot of things up. And I just got to a stage where I was like, I can invest the money, write off the money tax-wise as a result. I just don't want to think about the technical side too much. I want to have a space that's completely flexible, that I feel that I can just set it and forget it, essentially. And so this is what I've got now. So it's kind of, there's a floor that's been kind of like raised so that vibrations don't carry through. There's a false wall outside so that exterior sounds don't bleed through either. But it also means that I can have a window in my studio so that I'm working via daylight. And, having spent hours and hours talking to myself dark in the shadows under a duvet, the one thing, mental health wise, I was I need to have like daylight. I need to be operating in that kind of way, as well as the space to thrash about and be a bit of an idiot and all of that kind of stuff. So I knew that I wanted those kind of things, and then in collaboration with Moloko, kind of came up with what would be the best to fit the dimensions that were there. And over lockdown, it was made. So I was recording from our spare bedroom, like whilst that was going on, and then immediately transitioned into being here, and haven't wanted to leave ever since. So yeah, it's been nice as a result.
Yeah, I did a podcast with a composer a couple of weeks ago, and he had a similar setup where they built sort of false walls inside the room that vibrate to keep noise out and keep it in as well. Just thought it was pretty amazing, the things you can do these days with soundproofing. I thought soundproofing was like get some, some of that foam, like just put it up against the wall, and that was you kind of.
Yeah, so sound treatment as opposed to soundproofing and all of that kind of stuff. It's like, obviously, starting out, I needed to understand these things. And when I was DIYing it, I needed to understand, what a bass trap was for, and all of the different frequencies and how they are relevant to my particular voice and the microphone that I use, and not having too many reflective surfaces and all of that kind of thing. But there's a point where you kind of go, I need to be thinking about the performance. I want my focus to be on that, as opposed to anything else about like, if I move my leg, then something's going to go off and it's all going to be an absolute nightmare, or a lawnmower is going to happen. And a lot of, voiceover actors still have to deal with that as a kind of reality. But for me to, be as client-centric as possible so that they're focusing on the performance and not like, what's the sound quality here? Has he put a weird filter on this in order to try, or a gate in order to try and, hide various crimes of the audio variety? I don't want to be that guy. And it's, also your ear becomes attuned, as I'm sure you're kind of like familiar with. I started out, I listened to samples of when I first recorded from home now, and it sets my teeth on edge because I'm like, oh my God. But at the time, I was like, this is fine. This sounds very professional. Very good. As long as you stick a backing track behind it and, de-reverb the hell out of it. Yeah.
Backing tracks.
Yeah.
Save your ass.
Yeah, exactly. They cover a multitude of sins. But now, it's just like, if you want it raw, that's fantastic. But I've got the experience of processing it. So if a client wants something more ready to go, great. Then that's me as a service provider going, so what is it that you need?
Yeah. You're giving me ideas for like creating a sort of a studio of my own. I like that you can see your mic in your studio as well. It looks quite cool, I think.
Yeah, yeah. There we go. There you go. So this is a kind of like an extendable arm by Yellow Tech, who are not sponsoring me yet. From Germany, because it's fully like, it doesn't. So some of the microphone arms that I've had before, it's kind of like you set it here, and then over the course of a session, it kind of gradually goes down or whatever. And you're like, Chris, it sounds as if you're slightly off mic now. And I'm like, what? Oh, shit. All of this kind of thing. So, I did make a YouTube video as well about my studio build. And that's part. Yeah, it's on my website because because I'm dealing sometimes with audio engineers who go like, okay, so you say you've got a home studio, in inverted commas, and they're like, okay, what is it? So I'm like, here's a raw sample, but it's also like, if you want to see exactly what it looks like, here's a picture and here's a video of every single decision that I've made to make it what it is. So please don't come back to me saying that it's not very good.
Yeah, I think I've also gone through the phase of, you're recording on your phone, or like, especially during COVID, a lot of people were like, we need to record a podcast, but people are just at home. So you sort of like say, okay, record on your phone and record over Zoom. I think we've sort of come through that and get to the phase where like people just aren't accepting it anymore. I think, the audio quality is a bit too low. Speaking of low quality, I'm assuming, could you tell us about your first voice acting job, how it went, how did you get it?
Sure. The very first, so there's two. There's a voice acting job that I got, which was in a studio, and that was before I had a home studio and all of this kind of stuff, which was through my then acting agent, and that was more, I think, probably what a lot of actors think voiceover is like. You go into somewhere in Soho and there's lots of coffee and there's lots of people kind of sitting around feeling a bit self-important. Everybody that I worked on in that project, I hasten to add, was incredibly professional and, very focused on the job that they were doing. But that was for a video game. That was for Dark Souls 2. Where I played a half man, half scorpion, which surprisingly just sounded a little bit like me. I was like bigging myself to do like, what would it, going back to the animal study stuff that we've kind of like touched on. It's like, oh, what does this man scorpion sound like? And it's like, no, Chris, just do your normal voice. That'd be great. I was like, oh, okay, he's quite an introspective, sad man scorpion. Great. So there was that, and that was a lot of fun. That was and then you just kind of set it and forget it, and you don't have to worry about so many things. But then the first thing that I ever got from my home setup was from a pay-to-play site when I used to be on them, so a subscription site where you can audition, and so I sent my audition through, and it was for a Dutch architectural firm. It's kind of like a brand film for them, so they wanted kind of like lots of hushed tones whilst they showed all their beautiful architecture and what they could make for only several €100,000, that kind of thing, which they still have on their website, thankfully. And yeah, I did that, and it was very much like sent them 2 takes, and they were like, yeah, that's great. And the imposter syndrome kind of gradually abated. You were always like, someone's going to call me out on some of this because that seemed relatively straightforward and easy. But they never did. They just paid their invoice and said, thanks very much. And so that's what started the gateway into maybe the whole home studio thing might actually be viable.
And how would you define your style if you could? I think, certainly with the job that you just voiced for me, I was just very impressed by the sort of like the dramatics and cinematic sort of like feeling that you brought to it. It's sort of very, very the dignified kind of voice as well. How would you define
So
your own
dignified.
style? Dignified,
Especially when I'm trying to be a bat. Yeah, I mean, I think you obviously need to be aware of kind of what your natural sound is first and foremost. I know there are lots of connotations with my accent, both positive and negative. And so there's a natural air of professionalism and authority because people think, oh, he speaks proper to a degree. That's associated with the RP accent. Yeah, exactly. Receipt pronunciation accent. So I get that for free. And so it means that I don't have to try very hard. Like I don't need to try to be authoritative in that same way. So that self-awareness is useful. And I very much quite often people will kind of, when they're starting to market themselves, they'll market themselves just with their name. Because I was kind of separating my acting work and my voice acting work when I started out. I was like, I need a different brand. So I went with Naturally RP. So there's kind of, it's not exactly paradoxical, but it's kind of like, it's the RP and all those connotations that you may have with that, but it's natural. Hopefully it can still be conversational because I'm an actor and I understand how you can be conversational with it as well. And I kind of lean into it because I think it's better to make a memorable impression. I mean, caveats here. It's better to make a memorable impression than be, hi, I'm another voice actor, posing with a mic. In case you are in any doubt that I'm a voice actor and therefore I need to be kind of conjoined to my mic. Because then it's like the focus is on the wrong thing. It's like, yes, well done, you've found something that's all right. And the focus is on the technology as opposed to the performance. So I kind of leaned in, hopefully with, a sense of self-awareness to the whole RP thing by going like, I'm going to dress myself in a suit and have a teacup. And people might go, oh, God, that's so like old form kind of professional stereotype, corporate, white middle class men doing business, blah, 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 blah. Fair enough, fine. I get a lot of that work. I work a lot in the corporate sector because of how I sound. Sure, understood and acknowledged. But it's kind of like, yes, there's that, but hopefully there's a degree of self-awareness to that. And that's the kind of work that first came to me. But then also on top of that, there's the character work as well. So for me, in terms of standing out, that I found that brand more helpful than a hindrance, just because people go, oh, it's the guy with the teacup. They might go, oh, it's the guy with the teacup who looks a bit like a tit. But I'll still stand out a little bit more than another person with a microphone going, please hire me. So I think going slightly bolder with that is, it just makes you a bit more memorable.
I think embrace the bold, embrace the weirdness. I think people respond to it. I think, like, especially in this kind of line of work, in the creative work, people like that.
And it creates an element of mystery, because if I'm like contacting someone for the first time and they see the teacup and they see the suit, but they also see, oh, but he's got a TikTok account with how many followers doing what the... So there's this tension already in like, he's this, but he's also this. And that some people will bounce off that straight, but other people might go, that's intriguing, that's weird. A guy wearing a suit with a teacup is not the same guy who I thought would be doing monologues from Warhammer, for example. So I think being able to go like, well, I'm both. And I enjoy kind of sitting within that kind of like tension. Is a good thing for me.
I think you suit it perfectly, and I think especially your work in TikTok is like very, very audience orientated as well. I think like you're sort of like calling out fans, saying, "Hey, look, Chris, could you voice this?" And you're saying, "Yes, of course." And then you're posting like the reaction videos as well of people reacting to your work.
Yeah, no, that's a thing.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Is it weird watching it? You're just like, oh man, this is strange. Like,
well, it's partly weird because the whole kind of like reaction video, like I think it started really on kind of like YouTube, but on TikTok it's kind of even in a more weird, refined form where people are literally just like, they're not saying anything. They're just like, this is my face whilst this person does this thing. I'm not sure about the power dynamics. I'm sure there are many psychological, papers being written on that kind of thing in the first place. But as long as the reaction, certainly no one has, done a reaction to one of my pieces while self-harming. So so that's probably a positive step. Like, all of the responses seem to be like, I never expected it would be done like this or in this kind of way. Because, you know, you take, for example, something like anime, which I know nothing about, and which is very heightened in a very particular way, which I would never get cast as. But I'm treating it as a kind of almost a classical text. So I'm just going, I'm grounded in a slightly theatrical kind of way, and I'm treating it for real.
Yeah,
so
you're referring to like the Vegeta style stuff.
The Vegeta stuff from Dragon Ball Z, and you know, all of this kind of thing. You know, I'll very quickly like watch the YouTube kind of thing and go like, well, I could never do that. So let's not even try. But it's kind of like, if the bones in the speech are there, and I go like, actually, you could really get a hold of this and do it in a very different way that I would enjoy doing, or, you know, you pick an emotional state and you just go for it. And as long as the text is strong enough to, I mean, some people ask me to do like, oh, can you just do this line from here? And it's like, no, I'm not interested in doing that. I'm not going to learn anything from doing that at all. Because there are those people who are kind of like, oh, that's not how X character should sound. And you're like, sure, I mean, fill your boots if that's what your criteria is, but that's not what my criteria is. It's kind of, I mean, it's like the best text should be strong enough to survive and even invite reinterpretation. So from a classical point of view, that's like Shakespeare, obviously. Whether you understand it or not, there's no one definitive way of doing it. My whole thing is just kind of going, well, why not apply that to something like anime or something like Warhammer or something like, you know, whatever, rather than saying there's this one defined way of doing things. In actual fact, as long as, you know, the connection, the message, the storytelling is in the right place. We even see that in kind of like something like The Last of Us right now, the video game that has become the TV series. And it's like the certain actors in the video game, their performances are so iconic within the video game sphere. The whole idea of translating that into TV was like, oh my God, it's anathema. No one can be Troy Baker. No one can be, you know, X, Y, or Z kind of person. Whereas in actual fact, what they've managed to do is go like, actually, so other people can play these roles in a subtly different way. And it be completely valid, and it doesn't mean the video game's shit, and it doesn't mean the TV thing is shit. It means that they're both completely valid in different art forms, and that's an interesting conversation to have, generally speaking.
Yeah, I certainly liked The Last of Us TV series. I never played the game. I thought the TV series was amazing and the acting was great. Pedro Pascal, I thought he suited the role perfectly. I didn't play the game, so, you know, don't ask me. But I've certainly, I know what you mean about people have certain preconceptions about playing a game and then making a TV series about it. Yeah, could be very difficult.
There's a great podcast. There's a great podcast also as well where it's like Troy Baker, the original voice actor, interviewing Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin and, you know, all of those people about the choices that they've made to make it different. You know, and I find that fascinating from a creative point of view. You know, seeing what how it all works in different kind of like forms is fascinating to me.
Yeah, or like, you know, remaking a film, you know, like it's interpreting it differently, like, you know, All Quiet on the Western Front, you know, the one that came out on Netflix recently. Yep. What was I going to say? I thought your Vegeta was great. Like, I was a big Dragon Ball Z fan as a kid, and listening to your Vegeta, I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like Vegeta. And then I like listened more, and I was like, oh, actually, no, it's very good. Right. I can totally believe you as facing off against Goku or someone.
Someone with a very thin skin. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Evil or good?
Evil or good?
Yeah. Is your voice naturally more evil or more good?
Yeah, my voice is naturally more evil. Yeah, totally.
More evil.
Yep.
Yeah. I think you suit both, man. I think like.
I mean, yeah, sure. Yeah, I got range, darling. It's fine. But like typecast, not just because of the accent, but it's like it's the old cliche of like evil characters tend to be a lot more complex and more interesting, right? So, or at least have an element of complexity in that. You know, the anti-hero within all of these things. So in terms of my stage roles that I played kind of like previously, you know, it was things like Mr. Hyde in Jekyll and Hyde. It was Dracula. It was Victor Frankenstein. It was Lance Armstrong. That was a fascinating experience.
As the villain. Whoa.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, but in a kind of the actor's job is to be as sympathetic, or at least to understand the psychology behind it. So I did a lot of research about Lance Armstrong, and he's both a sociopath, but also an amazing. I find his, regardless of his achievements, both sporting and in terms of, the whole live strong thing, but like the psychology behind the man. And like you built, he was a person who built his entire identity on being good at this one thing. And then when real life, the outside world basically says, yeah, but everybody's on drugs, right? So you've got two choices. Either the thing that you've built your entire psychology around, you can't do anymore, or you get really good at taking the drugs. Because everybody else at this time is doing it. They're just not doing it very well. And he was like, I'll get really good at taking the drugs. And it's like, there's part of it that I'm like, okay.
I understand.
Yeah, it's kind of, well, I mean, if it's so all-consuming, I went without going, oh, I'll make it all about me. But I was like, if someone says that you can't act anymore, what would you do? If that one thing that you're passionate about, that you think defines you as an individual so much, your opportunity to be creative in my, if someone denies you that outlet, then what are you willing to do? When everybody else who's getting the plaudits and winning the stuff and whatever it is gaming the system, what would you do? And I think that was an interesting way, with that, it was a new writing piece called Pedal Pusher. And it was kind of done in the run up to, his revelations on Oprah hadn't come out yet. And then we restaged it, rewrote it and restaged it after they had. And it's fascinating to see the differences, obviously, as a result, because there is that level of ambiguity. I'm not saying that he was right by any stretch of the imagination. It's just more interesting.
Yeah, I think he certainly was an interesting man. I feel like we could spend a whole podcast just talking about Lance Armstrong.
I mean, there's also a really nasty piece of work who's destroyed people's lives. Like, don't get me wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. So, okay, can we go back to you mentioning walking into like a sound recording studio with other voiceover artists in there? It sounds like you sort of walk into a room, especially in the olden days, you had a mic and you're sort of facing off against another sort of voice actor as well, and sort of like trying to read out a script together, or trying to sort of read out sort of like a radio play or something like that. Is that your experience working with other actors in the same studio?
I've done a limited amount of audio drama where they do want you to be in the same kind of like space. I've not had extensive experience in doing it in that way, but I have been in rooms where that's happened, where it's weird because you're kind of caught in between this whole, I'm trying to respond off you because yeah, sure, of course you are. But like, you're physically in the room. So I feel as if I should be making eye contact whilst we're doing it and all of this kind of thing. So I think there's a tension there that you kind of have to get over. Whereas I've done quite a lot of video game projects where it's like, or commercial projects where there is another voice actor, but you're not seeing them. You're just hearing them. And for me, that's a lot easier. Because then you're just literally taking on board and focusing on the one thing rather than trying to split your focus. Because at the end of the day, it's an audio medium as well. So whereas, if you make a silent gesture, I might respond to that vocally in some kind of way, but the listener won't have heard that silent gesture. And therefore the response might seem a bit weird. So you have to appreciate that with audio drama, everything is slightly heightened again, tends to be. You have to give a little bit of I don't want to say signposting, but there's some indications you need to make because you don't have that visual medium, and a lot of that will be done by the production, with the walking off and all of the various, Foley stuff that you may end up being involved in or not. But a lot of it does have to be done by the words, as you walk away, I'm going to raise my volume because you're going away, and all of those other kind of like technical sides as well. So I actually find kind of having the blinkers on and just focusing on the voice that's coming to me helps for the form. But like I said, it's early stages for me in terms of that, in the room audio drama. That's only started to bleed back in, I think, consistently kind of post-pandemic as a result. So I'll be interested to see how things transpire in that respect.
Are there any sort of like voice actors that you admire, or sort of that you sort of had drawn you in, or?
I mean, I think mainly from the video game is my main kind of like loop, and I think Troy Baker is a very obvious in certain circles. Anyway, he's a great, very flexible. You like can do loads of different kind of like crazy voices as well. So he has that transformative aspect, but he's also very grounded, generally speaking. And that is what I really kind of like admire about his work. I think he's one of the kind of like foremost voice actors. Another one that I got to train with early on my career is a guy called Dave Fennoy, who's an American voiceover artist. And again, he's very much in the kind of the video game kind of sphere. Has that thing about like keeping everything very grounded, but can go kind of like crazy as well with different characterizations. And I think those people that talk about their craft are always interesting to me. So those two, but there's no kind of any other kind of like voiceover voice kind of guy or person that I go, oh my God, like sometimes their sound is amazing. But because I didn't grow up wanting to be a voice actor, it's not like, oh, I want to sound like X person or Y person, because that's kind of their signature kind of thing, and I'm not so much interested in that.
Yeah, are there any sort of like stereotypes that you have to overcome as a voice actor that people sort of come in, like perhaps try and come in trying to work with you, and you're trying to have sort of like get in front of them and say, hey, listen, this is not what actually voice acting is like,
I think there's an art to how you talk about stuff. Generally speaking, I mean it's all different, and you work with such a wide variety of different people, so that's fine. I think when the focus is on the sound, rather than the intention or the emotion or what's that more kind of external focus, that's probably what grinds my gears. But I get it, because sometimes you need that downward inflection, or the edit is going to cut at this particular moment, so you need to switch in that kind of way. So you need both sides of your brain working in that kind of way. Just like doing a stage show, you still need to be able to stand in your light so that the audience sees you whilst you're giving your speech or whatever. You can't just wander off into the aisle whilst you're doing it. But other than that, not really. I think it's kind of getting over. Lots of people are very uncertain about how to work with a voiceover artist. They don't know what to expect quite often, because increasingly, whereas I'd say maybe about 20 years ago, it was very much through the filter of an agency or a production coordinator or something else like that. Now, very much I'm obviously dealing with the client directly. So it's just about making sure they're not particularly scared of me, and they're just kind of going like, it's like, I'm happy to try it in different ways. That's absolutely fine. This is how I would approach doing this thing. So we could try it that way. But if there's another way that you want to try it, then that's great. If you want to go line by line through the entire thing, multiple kind of like times, then that's cool. That's fine. It is what you want. But it's just about being open and flexible, really, I suppose, is the main thing.
Yeah, I think open and flexible are very, very good ways to describe your sort of workflow. I found very, very easy to work with you.
Good.
So I've had other voiceover actors that said, it costs money to correct a line, or like maybe like the logo is pronounced incorrectly and things like that, or like charging royalties for like an online digital video, which probably won't be online for that long anyway. And you sort of like, listen.
It's all about empathy at the end of the day. I mean, on the one hand, it's like you got to know your worth, and it's a bit like if your client kind of asks you for endless revisions, and you're like, if you told me this, and this when I asked you originally, then we wouldn't have these fucking problems. And I wouldn't be tearing my hair out, and I wouldn't be working at 10 p.m. on a Friday night to get this shit done. So there's something about like it's your responsibility to like, I'm asking these questions, and if you don't answer them and then there's an issue, this is what my revision policy is, my terms and conditions and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, but you've also got to hold it all lightly, because you realise that very often you are dealing with the person caught in the middle. You can't nickel and dime. When is it worth kind of holding people to that, because it's like, I'm never going to work with this person again. So I'm just going to get my maximum fee out of this. And sometimes I've done that. I'm just like, I'm never going to work with you again because you don't know how to do your job. So yeah, I'm going to charge you for that thing because in my terms and conditions I am, and then I'm fine in ending this relationship. It's not happened often, I hasten to add. I delight to work with, but sometimes you kind of go like, no, history is not repeating. For the vast majority of people, I'll be like, okay, well, there's certain flexibility or whatever. And it's my responsibility partly to go like, you haven't given me a pronunciation guideline for this. I don't know how to say this. If I now guess, I'm guessing, and therefore there is a grey area. If you don't have the time to check with your client and you need a recording, I understand. But if it's 10,000 words and then you go like, oh, can you re-record it on the quick? I'm not going to be exactly elated with the process. So it's just about being transparent and honest, and also looking to new technology to go like further down the line. Are there going to be more and more kind of ways, just like the various editing software that I have now means that I don't have to worry about certain things in terms of post-production and all of that kind of stuff because it's all automated and there are keyboard shortcuts and all of that kind of stuff. Further down the line, if, I obviously give my best performance, but if it's like, we just need to change one word, if an AI version of my voice can change that one word for it, and there's no cost to you and there's no cost to me, I just go bang, bang, fantastic. Then I'm offering better customer service, you get it quicker, everyone's a winner, and I won't nickel and dime you about that either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so AI is certainly a question I wanted to ask you about. I think there's certain services out there that you can program to sort of to speak in your voice. I've never tried it, but there are, especially on TikTok, there's like the Joe Rogan voice or like a Joe Biden, or who else, Obama, voices that they're speaking in the Obama voice, and sometimes it's quite convincing. You're like, that actually does sound like Joe Rogan. Yep. And other times you're like, no, that doesn't sound like David Attenborough at all, or Morgan Freeman, or et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
I think, look, I just don't know what the ceiling is for AI and voice and what's going to happen. I think a lot of people could be scared of it. I think, say it's going to destroy us all, or it's going to take all of our jobs. Yep. But I think, as you just mentioned, it could just be a tool that people use to sort of assist in their own workflows, like you are already. It sounds like. Could you just talk to us a little bit about
sure.
that?
No, definitely. So I made a video again on my YouTube, which was about it probably about a year ago, and it started out with like an excerpt from Jurassic Park. Jeff Goldblum asking, "Just because you can doesn't mean that you should," about AI, essentially, and then it cut to like an excerpt from the Terminator 2 movie with a kind of a metal foot kind of stamping on a human skull, just in case that point hadn't been hammered home. Everybody, we're all terrified of losing our jobs because of AI in various different ways. I mean, it's a very real kind of fear. So you've got two options. You either panic and put your head in the sand. You go all out attack and all AI is bad. And I think, again, that's like, we've got to be very clear about what our rights are and being very vocal about those kind of things. And like, there's a campaign by Actors Equity called, I think it's Don't Let AI Steal the Show. In terms of the rights usage of your voice, and anybody can copy it, and being very kind of like clear about what your rights should be. There was an example of like TikTok themselves used a voice actor's voice without their say-so. And that was settled out of court eventually. A voiceover actor called Bev Standing, kind of like.
Is that the woman, like the woman's voice?
Exactly. Yeah. So she didn't realize, and she'd done some e-learning or something for a company like years ago, and then suddenly it was on TikTok as like the default female text-to-speech voice, and she was like, this is going to have huge ramifications for me. Because now brands will go, oh, it's the TikTok voice. We don't want that. Because it has,
poor woman.
Exactly. So that was a huge thing. So we need to be very, very kind of like keenly aware about what our rights are and how we fight our corner. At the same time, I think education is the way forward. So there are all of these different AI companies popping up. I'm always looking in terms of how could it augment my offering and my workflow. Yes, the geography is always changing. Just like, 15, 20 years ago, the vast majority of voiceover artists didn't have home studios. So it was, it was a completely different job, but technology has changed with the time. And, those people who used to drive from one studio to another and do 20 scripts in sitting down and just reading them all out and then going to the next station, that's kind of gone. And so AI is kind of the next sea change after the home studio, as far as voiceover is concerned. So, for me, I'm currently collaborating with an AI company called Vocal ID, who have been acquired by Veritone, who are again one of these kind of like big monolithic conglomerates, because they're all trying to find different ways of monetizing it and making it commercially viable, essentially. An AI version of my voice has been built, and at the moment it can do certain perfunctory stuff to a pretty good standard. And what I think that will mean is that because we are, imbibing more content generally, there is more content being kind of produced. And there are certain, it's still open to its speculation, but, there's still certain voiceover stuff that is definitely going to go the way of AI because it just makes sense to. Whether or not that's phone prompts, like basic phone prompts as opposed to interesting and inventive ones, or, having personalized adverts so that whatever you're listening to says, "Hi, Will," as opposed to "Hey," or whatever. You can either hire a voiceover artist to record all of the different variations of voices or locations or names or locations, or you get an AI to do it. I think we know which one is going to be the one that makes sense. And there are lots that it's still testing the area and what the boundaries are. It goes back to kind of storytelling and like, I know where my value is and in what I'm trying. It's like, if it's just the sound, someone out there can replicate my voice and Morgan Freeman's voice and whoever else's voice. And, within a couple of years, it will be as good as, that uncanny valley thing of, not sure, that will go. So it's the underlying performance underneath that sound that needs to be the big thing. So it's the storytelling and the emotion. That's the selling point, not the microphone. Those are the kind of things. And then, like, if I can then have AI Chris be able to do the pickups, or or whatever at a reduced fee or whatever, then that's great in terms of the workflow. But also the fact that I've engaged. I'm in a relationship with someone who has got a vested interest in my AI voice doing well, means if someone then copies my voice from all of my TikTok videos and starts to try and do something, it's not just screwing me over, it's screwing them over. And the AI voice model that they've invested $10,000 to build on my behalf. So it's not just me who'll be going, you need to take that down. It'll be them going, actually, this is in contravenance of an agreement that we've made. So in terms of greater leverage, in terms of being able to stamp on those things, that's potentially a way forward. I mean, I have no idea about how it will develop, but, that's where I am at the moment.
Yeah, so it's kind of giving you like a backup, giving you some backup. Saying,
potentially. I mean, I think it's increasingly, it's like a dialogue that needs to continue between myself and the provider. To see what's viable for them in terms of a model and what's viable for me in terms of a model. Like right now, I don't have the AI version of me being able to offer those kind of like pickups and adjustments seamlessly. I would love to be able to do that because it's something that like maybe they could monetize an arrangement with me as well, because then I can pass on the cost saving to my clients. And that's another reason for me to, but I think that there will be I think the risk is obviously very high of like the market will polarize very massively. And in terms of people just getting in to the industry, where quite often you might start with doing not very demanding voiceover work to get your feet wet, essentially. I can see a lot of that stuff going the AI route, in which case, how do you start? And,
Yeah, that was a question I was going to ask you. Is sort of like with video editing, it's like you can see a lot of the sort of like mundane, monotonous, boring video editing work being.
But it's
taken by
experience,
AI.
and yeah.
Yeah, it's a job that an assistant editor could learn and sort of learn on the job and sort of like get used to the controls and how to edit.
Yeah.
So the question is absolutely valid. Like, is it taking some of that early experience away from humans? Potentially, yes. But
I
could we relate that back to any kind of technological advance that's happened in the last 100 years? Could you say that loom? What are they called? Like a machine that creates like looms, like is that taking
those videos
work away?
It does, but it's kind of like you need to kind of like adapt to what the market is to a degree. So it's definitely tricky to know, and I think especially when it's like when you're looking at diversity of voices as well, I think that's an important thing into it. Again, being very conscious of being a white male middle class guy from the UK. In terms of representation, obviously really, really does matter. And I think, if you don't have those opportunities on which to kind of gain your experience and show what you can do, then it can be a real struggle. And, I tried to, get in with voiceover agents for 8 years and got nothing. Despite not really doing anything kind of like different, and then made my own way through kind of like using pay-to-play sites and freelancing sites, and then I was able to kind of get money into the business to actually reinvest in the studio that you see and the coaching and the performance coaching, so I know what I'm doing and investing in the right demos and the website and the SEO and all of that kind of stuff, which therefore means that I can now focus more on the storytelling stuff and the emotional stuff rather than just, getting the money in. However, so I think there are lots of kind of like resources available, certainly, but I think there's always going to be that kind of tension. There's a kind of like a whole world has also been created, a whole industry has been created in terms of training up people to do voiceover. And how that's gonna transpire if that fresh blood isn't continually coming in is another thing entirely. So I don't know what the best solution is for any of that, but I've created my own kind of like free voiceover educational kind of like courses to kind of, that's my way of kind of trying to send the ladder back down, to use quite a hackneyed phrase, but it's kind of like I don't want to coach people, but in terms of, both from the business side of things and the performance side of things, using resources, sharing knowledge, I'm, certainly all for that.
So just in terms of your process, what's the best way to work with a voiceover artist if you're like, just either a studio or just like a producer, and, what kind of direction could help?
I think it's about information curation is probably the biggest thing. It's like being able to supply what you need, and if you've got other kind of like artistic materials or whatever already in the mix, whether or not that's music, whether or not that's pre-existing media that is inspiring what it is that you're trying to do, any kind of reference like that is really, really useful. But you want to be able to leave a little bit of space to be able for the voice actor to kind of step into, so that it feels collaborative in some way, shape or form, rather than like, I'm certainly like in certain scenarios, people will talk to me for like 10 minutes on like what their specific offering is in terms of SaaS software or this character's background, and it's like, none of this is relevant to how I say this one line. Nothing is relevant to how I say this one line. It's like, yeah. So I think being able to filter like what matters to them, what doesn't matter to them, I think is the key thing. And then it's boiling it down to what's the emotion that you want your audience to feel, is the key thing. I mean, do you want them excited, elated, intrigued, surprised? If there's a journey, what's the journey from and to? That's the thing. Is it from nervous and anxious about this kind of thing before the realization of the product and it's all happy, happy, happy? Or, to give a gross simplification, but something of the emotional journey, and then kind of hopefully trusting that the voice actor has a good way of getting there. So I think that level of communication is great, but being concise with the information and providing as much as possible in terms of like, if you've got a working edit, fantastic, great, share.
Yeah, like I've sort of voiced things before in the past myself, just to sort of like send to an artist and say, look, this is the kind of thing we're working with. I think the script that we sent you, you absolutely nailed, like on take one. Even the demo script, I was like, absolutely nailed.
But you'd send a very clear reference in terms of this is the kind of tone, this is the kind of vibe. We couldn't be talking about more different things in a lot of ways. I'm contemplating what happens in the literal last seconds before I die. Here's this service that, they're not the most natural bedfellows, but in terms of like this is the vibe and the feel that we want under it as a shorthand. There'll be some people who go like, I'm so desperately offended that you have referenced this particular thing and you think that I'm just going to pigeon it in exactly this kind of way. If they're actually a voice actor of any worth, then they can take that reference and make it their own, rather than going, "Oh my God, you've given me a line reading. How could you?" If it's like you need it to sound in a particular kind of way, just tell me how you want it to sound in a particular kind of way, rather than go like, "Oh no, we really need to feel it. Think of the color blue or whatever." It's like, so after the word "the," I need a 3-second beat. Fantastic, great. Yeah, fine. That's like. That makes my life easier. We can work from that, and I can give you 3 different versions of that. That's okay. But you deal kind of concisely with what kind of like matters. So being able to give like whether or not it's a mood board or an audio mood board or whatever, or it's just like. It's amazing how quickly a problem is solved by it's like, what's the music? Oh my God! Okay, this is complete. It's the completely different tone to what I thought it was. You said powerful and inspiring and strong, and then you come in with this kind of classical plinky plonky thing, and it's like, oh, it's completely different. Actually, you want me to build in a complete. It's like, oh, okay, fine, but now I understand it, because if it was so easy to communicate in words, then you'd be communicating it in words and not in the advertisement. So it's great to use those shorthands by all means.
Yeah. I never thought about using like an audio mood board as a way to sort of like help or assist like a voice actor.
I mean, at different stages, like I find it, just as part of a practice, like you read the same script, but you play completely different music in your headphones at the same time as doing it. It will colour the performance massively. Or as I find with the TikTok speeches, I just change the music that runs underneath it, and it seems to have a massively different result. And it's like, how I've played the speech hasn't changed, but the music is working, either it's working with it or it's working counter, or there's that particular punctuation point that fills it all in. So for me, to have an appreciation of that, the music builds at this point, or at least you would like it to once it's been commissioned and signed off. Great, fine. So it needs to go in that kind of like way. So it being a bit more of a two-way dialogue. I mean, I embrace those opportunities when they're available. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, in some sense, it's like your ego is not your amigo. So you're trying to like take your ego out of it, listen to what the client is saying, and then sort of say it in the way that they're kind of trying to direct you to, but also add your own bit to it and sort of give some sort of yourself to it.
I think
well.
this. I think in terms of like for a video producer or anybody on the production side, the one thing I would say is like, give room at the end so that the voiceover artist can do a take for themselves. Like, obviously not if it's a ridiculously long thing. It's like, okay, so let's go back for the other 5,000 words again, but I'm just going to do my spin on it. We've all got time for that, right? And you're going to pay me extra for that, right? No, actually, Chris, it's okay, thanks. But to kind of, quite often, it's like you can sometimes get so many notes that it's kind of, you can feel the joins. Oh yeah, I can hear that upward inflection, and then we use take 20 for the other bit. And it's like, yeah, he feels as if he's had a few more coffees before from line 1 to line 2. Subtle differences that most of the time that's absolutely fine. But to go like just go for it, and then you take on board all of the direction. But you're not like, I need to get to here, and then I need to get. You're playing it less as a musical score, and more than just focusing on the person that you're speaking to, and that's that's the aim. It's like the microphone is an ear. You're speaking to that one person, even if it's an audience of thousands or millions. You've got to be thinking that you're speaking to that one person. So what it is that you're trying to get from that person in that respect.
Yeah, so I had like a brief hour training with Maxine Mahweni. She was like an ex-BBC presenter.
Sure.
And she just did like a quick course. So that's my puppy.
Hello. Oh.
But she said have like a little character on top of your camera that you can sort of like imagine as your audience, or imagine that's a person.
Yeah.
And you're delivering your speech to that audience or to that person. Otherwise, it can come across as sort of fake or.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think any form of kind of like visualization in that kind of way is just super helpful, because it'll completely change, whether or not you're imagining your father, whatever connotations that might be, to your wife or your best friend or your puppy or whatever. I mean, I've normally got my studio cat, sitting in this chair whilst I'm standing up kind of recording, and she's just like, fuck me, like... generally looking a bit nonplussed, occasionally, licking herself, so I'm always looking for opportunities for a more responsive audience, and quite often I have to imagine them, so there you go.
Have you ever had some bad direction, and how could you avoid it? And maybe do you have any horror stories of working with a client?
I think the only nightmare stuff is when you're brought in and then they ask for something completely other than what you can ever do. It's like, how's your Welsh? And you're like, shit. Like, this is only going to be offensive to anybody or whatever. I think it's like kind of, I'm just, they'll go, I'm just spitballing here. It's just like, what if you try it in an Indian accent? And I'm like, oh my God. Like, no, I'm not going to try there. And, I think that's one of the reasons why I've got the branding that I have. It's like, so what's your accent? What do you do? And it's like, see how my email is naturally RP. I mean, I'm trying to give you as big a hint as I possibly can here, but, here we go. So that, or those people, quite often you'll have people who, they'll give you line readings, that's fine, but unfortunately the voice in their head is not the voice that comes out. So you can parrot back to them exactly what they're doing, and they're still going, no, it's not like this, it's like this, and you're like, my life. And you've just got to go like, I'm literally just going to have to keep playing the keys until I accidentally get across the right one, and you don't know why or how they're going for what they're going for. So that's the main thing. But I've thankfully only had like a handful of those in 7 years full time, so it's not been too bad. So
some people kind of like tone deaf to what you're sort of like saying, or.
Yeah, exactly, and not listening, or you raise a particular question or concern, and they're so keen to kind of imbibe their knowledge, they don't actually take on board your feedback or your question. Mm-hmm. Like, how do I say this?
Yeah,
for example. Yeah.
Okay, so just a couple last questions. I'm sorry.
No worries.
So, what's it like having fans on TikTok? Have you ever been, like recognized in the street or like?
Not yet. No, it's all fine. I mean, it's kind of like it's now got to a stage where I think I've got about 125,000 followers, but it's all.
So that's massive. It's amazing.
But so it's kind of like in a kind of I don't know kind of way. But thankfully, no, I haven't yet. But more people have like come to me saying, I saw your TikToks and therefore wanted to kind of reach out to you about that kind of stuff. So that's nice, and it's weird, and I will see how long as long as it continues to be fruitful and interesting. I think there are some times where it's like, oh, well, now I've got to do this speech, and like loads of people are asking for a particular kind of speech, so I've got to kind of do it. And it's like, that's not what it's about, man. And I had to kind of like be like key into not exactly teaching the audience, but kind of going, it's like, content creators who become famous for doing this one thing. And then if they diverge from doing the one thing, their audience doesn't follow them. So I will now be insistent on going like, I know that this monologue from Richard II, which is incredibly complex linguistically, ain't going to necessarily fly with the vast majority of people who like my anime and Warhammer content. I know this to be true. However, I'm going to post it because it's the only thing that I feel in the mood that I'm able to kind of like do. And it's just what I feel like doing right now. And kind of like roll with
typecast.
I don't want to be like, oh, he's the anime guy who does things in a particular kind of way. I'm not saying that I've got the greatest range in the world, because I am sure I do not. And I'm trying to add strings to my bow, but I know what my defaults kind of like go to. And I've kind of like made a brand off of those kind of things. But I just need to be aware of myself that I don't get characterized into, oh, he's the British anime guy. Because I don't think that's particularly helpful.
Or like maybe like Mark Hamill, where he's like the Joker, and that's all like a certain generation all remembers him from.
I mean, maybe potentially. Although I'd say, to his credit, he has got that actual transformation. So he's actually done a lot more voiceover stuff that is varied that you wouldn't think is him. But because I'm not like a transformational voice kind of actor, I'm never going to be that guy. Yeah, I'm doing work and I'm working on accents and more extreme characterization, so I can give a bit more kind of like breadth. But it's not what I'm passionate about doing, or doing all of the different voices, or these are the 20 Disney princes in a minute. I'm never going to be the person that makes that video. I admire the technical expertise of the people that are capable of doing that, but never in my life will I be doing that. So I just need to come to terms with that and not try and play to that audience, if that makes sense.
What do you wish people asked you before you started a job?
I think it's just kind of what would serve you best. Again, I think it goes down to kind of like information, essentially. And it's kind of like, what would be of use? Here's the script. Here's the kind of like project. What else would you kind of like need? Because if it's like, oh, I need more backstory about this character, then I can proactively ask for it. So just having that willingness to have an open dialogue, a little bit of a back and forth. I know sometimes time is money. It's just like, I need this thing like this and I need it yesterday. Great, fine, totally get that on board and I can do that as well. But for that stuff where you want to dig a little kind of like deeper, then obviously being able to have a little bit of a back and forth is always kind of like welcome when possible. So I think making clear actually what the parameters are. Like, I need this quickly. It needs to be like this. Please do it very, very quickly. Thank you very much and effectively. 3 versions would be great. Thanks. Versus, you want to be a lot more kind of collaborative and open to that kind of thing. Let me know that in advance because I will ask different questions. As a result, I'll dig a lot deeper because I know it's not going to cost you time and money to dig deeper. Whereas sometimes I might be like, I want to ask this question, but also they've got 20 minutes, so maybe they don't want to do that. So I think just being clear about the intentions from their side would be great.
Yep, got it, cool. And last question is, what is your best advice for young voice actors trying to sort of make it in the industry or sort of coming up the ranks? What would you say to them? I would say ignore any advice that any kind of very established voiceovers would give you now, because I think the geography, as we've established about the whole AI situation, is always changing so radically. You're going to learn as much from your peers operating now, getting started now, or in the last few years, than you're going to be someone who started 20, 30 years ago. So, like, I got money through my business initially, like working primarily on freelancing sites and pay-to-plays. And lots of people, I didn't realize until after I'd started doing this, people were like, oh, you'll never be able to get a reputable job or agent or any of this kind of things if you go that way. You need to go this way. And if I listened to them, I wouldn't still be a voice actor. So I think kind of like looking at the people that you want to kind of emulate who are active in the space now, who are doing the work now, who are working with the people that you would like to work with now, reaching out to them. The wonderful thing about voice actors is because we're on our own for the majority of the day, pets notwithstanding, talking to ourselves. As a result, when people reach out, we tend to be quite over effusive in going, yes, of course I'll help you. In any way I possibly can. I would love to be able to talk to a real person. That would be very nice. And then that leads into the actor's propensity to monologue. Let me tell you about myself and what I found. But, I think asking people who you admire for help is the best way forward, rather than going on older or secondhand information would be the key. Yep. And are you open to young voice actors sort of emailing you?
Yeah, totally. Like the resources on my website. So I kind of I point people to there are a couple of free courses that I have on Skillshare, which cover so many of the obvious questions. So just to counterbalance, reach out with questions by all means, but also realize that my time is not infinite. And I've put resources out there which answer a lot of the questions. How do I get started? How do I market? How do I practice on my own? Well, I've created courses that are free. If you sign up for a free trial, you can bang it out in 2 hours and make all of the notes that you want. Then come back to me. And by all means, if you have in-depth questions, just respect that I will not get back to you immediately, because I'm always answerable first to my clients, second to my wife, third to my cat. Then... Not necessarily in that order, Depends. So I've always also got to prioritize that. So obviously I want to give to support in any way that I can, but I've tried to address that by creating materials that are out there and readily available that I can point people to.
Nice one. I think that's the sound bite that we're going to put at the start of the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah,
the cat. It's the cat thing.
Great.
Yeah. Lead with a picture of me and my cat. That's social media 101 right there.
Cat tax. Cool. All right, Chris, mate, that was amazing.
Oh, it was a real pleasure. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, seriously.
And lovely to actually meet you in kind of like a real life. That's
you
always
too.
nice
You too.
as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that's great.
But honestly, that was awesome. I think one of the bonuses about recording with podcasts with a voiceover artist is that voice actor, is that they have a microphone at home as well.
Yeah, I know. From a technical side, it's a lot less kind of like the input says it's this, but it doesn't seem to be working. We've all gone through. Yeah, we've all gone through that third circle of hell multiple times. Yeah. And it's usually when it's a client on the other end kind of going, am I on loudspeaker? And you're halfway through and you're like, yes, that has been picked up by my microphone. Thank you so much, Graham, for that. It's fine.
Click. See the sound icon. Click that.
Yeah, okay, great, fine.
Click
I'm just gonna go back. I'm not gonna be passive aggressive. I'm above that. Anyway, once more with feeling, ball bearings, and how to use them.
Thank you so much for listening to the end of the show. If you've enjoyed the podcast, I would love if you could rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts. Or check out the Small Pocket Podcast on my YouTube channel for more. I hope to see you in the comments. See you again next time. Thanks for listening.